Nero was the fifth emperor of Rome, reigning from AD 54 to AD 68. His reign was marked by highs and lows. As volatile and eccentric as the man himself appeared to be, in this video we will look at how Nero came to power, his time in office, and his ultimate downfall. Nero's mother was Agrippina, the great-granddaughter of the Roman Emperor Augustus and the sister of Claudius's predecessor, Caligula. At just 13 years of age, Agrippina married Nero's father, the Roman general Domitius Ahenobarbus. Nero was born in the 15th of December AD 37. Little was known of the relationship between Agrippina and Domitius. Domitius died shortly after in AD 41 while Nero was just 4. Furthermore, rumors were abound of the scandalous nature of Agrippina's relationship to her brother, Emperor Caligula. Caligula was said to enjoy incestuous relations with his 3 sisters. He was said to be most drawn to his sister Drusilla, spending much time with her over the others. Perhaps spurred by jealousy or ambition, Agrippina began to plot against her brother. When his favorite sister, Drusilla, died of fever, she conspired with her other sister to place Drusilla's widower, Lepidus, on the throne through a plot to assassinate Caligula. The plot failed and she was exiled. Lepidus was executed for his treason. After Caligula's eventual assassination at the hands of his personal guard, Claudius became emperor and restored Agrippina's fortunes and estates. She eventually married a second time to Gaius Sallustius Passienus Crispus. Crispus was a wealthy senator who had been elected consul of Rome twice. Following Crispus's untimely death, some whispered that Agrippina was somehow behind it. Yet, a lack of evidence and Crispus's popularity meant that Agrippina benefited greatly from his death. She was seen as a sympathetic figure, a widowed wife of a popular senator. Perhaps more importantly, she inherited Crispus's considerable wealth for herself and her son, Nero. In AD 48, the reigning emperor Claudius had his wife, Valeria Massilina, executed for attempting to overthrow him. As he entertained suggestions to remarry, members of the Senate pushed him to consider Agrippina to mend the long-running feud between the powerful Julian and Claudian family branches. On New Year's Day in AD 49, Claudius married Agrippina. The marriage was met with widespread disapproval, mainly since Agrippina was the former empress Massilina's second cousin, thus making Claudius Agrippina's uncle. Regardless of the outcry, Agrippina was quick to move to secure her newfound position. She falsely accused Claudius's second wife, Paulina, of witchcraft. With no trial, Paulina was forced to surrender her properties and exiled from Rome. She committed suicide, allegedly on Agrippina's orders. Anybody in the imperial court whom she suspected of harboring loyalties to the ex-wives of Claudius were ruthlessly removed. She manipulated the placement and actions of influential people around Claudius. This included his personal doctor, secretary, and the head of the Praetorian Guard. Agrippina's influence on Claudius did not go unrewarded. Claudius granted her the honorific title of Augusta. The title, which meant empress, allowed Agrippina to have her own courts, have her own visage on coins, and wear the prestigious imperial regalia. After her rise to Augusta, Agrippina persuaded Claudius to adopt Nero as his son and heir. Nero gave up his birth name, Lucius Domitius Ahenobarbus, and adopted the name we now know him by, Nero Claudius Caesar. There was still one final obstacle for Agrippina towards Nero's ascension: Britannicus. Britannicus was Claudius's son from his marriage to Valeria Messalina, the emperor's third wife, whom he had ordered executed for treason. Agrippina moved swiftly to remove those who saw Britannicus as Claudius's rightful heir, even going as far as to have Britannicus's tutor executed. With his supporters dwindling, Britannicus became less prominent in the Roman court, with Nero assuming more and more prestigious and visible duties. The stage was set for Nero to succeed Claudius as Emperor of Rome. In AD 54, Claudius died, and Nero became the fifth emperor of Rome. The early years of his reign started with a lot of promise and hope for the people of Rome. As part of his reforms, he gave more power back to the Senate by restoring the privileges taken away by past emperors. He did away with the practice of secret courts, thus reducing the politicking and backstabbing among the senators. While these moves made him popular with the high-born members of the Senate, Nero did not forget the low-born of his empire. Capital punishment was banned, and blood sports in the famous Roman arenas were forbidden. Nero also reduced the economic hardship of his people by lowering taxes. Slaves were afforded more rights and could bring their owners to the courts for perceived injustices. As Nero settled into his position, his relationship with his powerful mother Agrippina began to turn frosty. Agrippina continued to dictate on how the new emperor conducted his affairs. She would hold court beside her son and attend official meetings with foreign dignitaries. Her influence and power was so considerable that it made Nero uneasy. Were his reforms truly his or his mother's? Agrippina had also arranged the marriage of Nero to his stepsister Octavia, the daughter of Claudius and Valeria Messalina. They were betrothed as soon as Agrippina had married Claudius, Octavia becoming a valuable pawn for Agrippina in her plan to place Nero on the throne. Nero and Octavia both resented this union, and their marriage was not a happy one. To make matters worse, her brother, Britannicus, was murdered a few months after Nero's ascension. He allegedly drank from a poisoned cup at a dinner party hosted by her sister and Agrippina. It is widely speculated that the assassin was acting on Nero's orders, as Nero grew concerned and paranoid that Agrippina would turn against him and declare Britannicus the rightful heir due to their worsening relationship. Furthermore, Nero began to have an affair with Poppaea Sabina, who at that point of time was married to the future Emperor Otho. Agrippina was strongly against this relationship, particularly as she saw Sabina as a potential rival to her. Nero was now convinced he had to act against his mother to stop what he perceived as her plots and schemes. She was removed from the palace and forced to move into the imperial residences outside of Rome. Her titles were reduced, her bodyguards replaced, and her official duties made redundant. Yet Nero was not done with his mother. He decided to assassinate Agrippina by arranging a boat that was designed to sink. Agrippina managed to survive, swimming to shore. She would be murdered later at her residence by Nero's assassins. Agrippina's death would be a turning point for the fortunes of Nero and Rome. Despite what Nero perceived as her overbearing influence, historians credit much of the stability and reforms of the early years of Nero's reign to Agrippina and her appointed advisors. Agrippina herself always seemed to act in the interest of her son, despite the accusations of treason that Nero would place on her. According to the Roman historian Tacitus, Agrippina had been warned by astrologers that her son would eventually kill her. "Let him kill me, provided he becomes emperor," she replied. Nero never really recovered from his mother's death. He would often complain about nightmares about his mother where she haunted him for her murder. He turned to priests to help stop his nightmares and would beg forgiveness from the gods for his matricide. His relationship with his wife Octavia became worse with Agrippina out of the picture and his affair with Poppaea. He accused her of being barren and unable to provide him with an heir. She was exiled and then murdered on Nero's orders. Nero married Poppaea shortly after. They had a daughter together. Unfortunately, the infant would die just a few months later. Poppaea herself would later die while pregnant with Nero's second child. Paranoia and self-indulgence became the defining characteristics of Nero's rule. He became more and more unhinged from reality. He overreacted dramatically to perceived slights and took flattery at face value, wholly believing in his own greatness. He grew aloof, indulging in his personal pleasures, while leaving the running of government mainly to his two advisors, Burrus and Seneca. He envisioned a grand plan to build the Domus Transitora. This would have seen many of the grand gardens in Rome linked to the Grand Palace with massive statues of Nero planned along the routes. It would be a testimony to Nero's genius and the acclaim he so richly thought he deserved. Nero adored the theater and loved to sing, write poetry, and perform on stage. He took a year to tour Greek theaters. He performed in many plays and even constructed a theater in Rome to exclusively host his plays, the Theater of Nero. Theater brought Nero closer to the people whom now saw the emperor frequently at plays. Nero mingled freely with his audience and entertained them. However, members of the Senate and the high-born of Roman society were appalled. This was not the appropriate behavior for an emperor of Rome. His indulgences did nothing to suppress his brutality. In AD 62, his closest advisor and mentor Burrus died. That year, Nero turned back on his promise to give power back to the Senate and reintroduced treason trials. Any member of the Senate who spoke or wrote against Nero could be jailed, exiled, or even killed based on flimsy evidence. He executed his political rival, Rubellius Plautus, a Roman noble who was part of the influential Julio-Claudian dynasty. Rubellius was critical of Nero's increasing tyranny and his authoritarian rule. When rumors began to surface that Rubellius was plotting to overthrow Nero with a disgruntled Roman general in the east, Nero immediately ordered his execution. It is said that upon receiving Rubellius's head from his executioner, Nero laughed and remarked on his nose, describing it as grotesque. Not just content with his head, Nero had Rubellius's entire family executed. This brutal and heinous act on a well-regarded Roman noble and his family sent shockwaves throughout the empire. It appeared that no one, low-born or high-born, was saved from Nero's madness. In July of AD 64, Rome was ravaged by flames in an event that was known as the Great Fire of Rome. The fire raged for 6 days, destroyed many buildings, and left many homeless. In the aftermath of the fire, Nero tried to repair the damage by rebuilding homes and enacting stricter fire safety laws. However, due to his grandiose architectural ideas for Rome, Nero was accused of starting the fire to clear the city and enact his plans for the Domus Aurea, a grand new palace which he began almost immediately after the fire. Some Roman historians even accuse him of starting the fire to create a real-life backdrop for a theatrical performance of the burning of Troy. Nero needed a scapegoat to be a target of the rising anger of the populace. Christians, followers of the new and fledgling religion, were an easy target for Nero to put the blame on instead. Christians did not pray to the Roman gods, and hence were viewed with suspicion and mistrust by many Romans. Furthermore, Christianity didn't recognize the worship of the emperor as protector and guardian of Rome, something Nero deemed as a gross personal insult. Nero accused them of starting the fire, subjecting Christians to cruel and public punishments. Christians in Rome were arrested and sent to the Colosseum and theaters, where they were sent before lions to entertain the crowds. Many were even burned alive on fire pyres. Crucifixion, a punishment that was normally reserved for the worst of criminals, were performed on Christians. Among the victims of Nero's persecution were prominent Christian leaders such as St. Paul. He was one of the 12 apostles of Jesus Christ who had been with him till his death. He pleaded to be crucified upside down, as he felt unworthy of being crucified as Jesus. Nero granted him his wish. The cost of rebuilding Rome after the Great Fire and Nero's exuberant building projects began to rapidly deplete the Roman treasury. Nero had to raise taxes across Rome's provinces as a result, which caused widespread unhappiness and pushed many who were already suffering to poverty. Furthermore, his bizarre and aloof behavior isolated him from the Senate and Roman governors, the very people he relied on to maintain his empire. As his leadership faltered, tensions rose and discontent began to come to the fore. On the March of AD 64, Gaius Julius Vindex, the governor of Gallia Lugdunensis, which is now known as modern-day France, rose up in rebellion against Nero's tax policies. He was joined by Servius Sulpicius Galba, the governor of Hispania Tarraconensis, now known as modern-day Spain. Vindex was ultimately defeated by the governor of Germania, whom remained loyal to Nero. However, his officers attempted to persuade him to declare himself emperor and overthrow Nero. These open signs of discontent among the officers in the Roman legions began to spread through the empire. Many of them were appalled by Nero's eccentric stage performances, which went against the Roman norms expected of the emperor. Generals of the Roman armies began to declare for Galba, the governor of Hispania Tarraconensis, as his rebellion began to pick up momentum and spread like wildfire. Nero's reign was coming to an end as his support rapidly disintegrated. Nero himself began to realize it when the prefect of the Praetorian Guard declared for his rival Galba. He decided to flee Rome and considered his options. He could flee to the east, where some provinces remained loyal to him, or throw himself at Galba's feet as he advanced. In the end, Nero summarized he wouldn't live long enough to see these actions, as his soldiers refused to take his orders and abandoned him. He returned to Rome and spent the night in his palace. At midnight, Nero awoke to find his palace empty and his guards missing. Fearing that he was about to be murdered, he fled to a villa owned by an ex-slave whom he had freed. It was at this time that he learned that the Roman Senate had declared him a public enemy. Nero decided to commit suicide to escape his enemies as time ran out. He asked his entourage to dig his grave while he prepared himself. As he did, it was said he was repeating the words qualis artifex perio, which meant what an artist the world is losing. Nero couldn't, however, bear to plunge the sword into himself. He lost his nerves and begged his private secretary Epaphroditus to do the deed for him instead. In the end, Epaphroditus granted him his final wish. Nero died on the 9th of June AD 68. His death marked the end of the Julio-Claudian dynasty. With a reign that began with much promise but ended with much bloodshed and suffering, Nero was remembered as a mad tyrant by the Roman historians that followed. Without his mother to keep him in check, Nero succumbed to his own passions and delusions. He murdered and indulged in his own desires without care. This ultimately alienated him from his people and ensured his demise.